there's no doubt that this the rhetoric that this hospital attack, blast, whatever you call it, has triggered in the Arab world has put more pressure on groups like Hezbollah which have already a high degree of rhetoric around this conflict in Gaza to put its money where its mouth is. So I think you've seen the anger on the streets of Arab capitals. If these organizations like Hezbollah, which have promised to defend Gaza in some way by opening a second front, if they then sort of meekly cave and don't, that will be a strong blow to their reputations.
Now, let's talk to Richard Spencer, the Times correspondent in Israel, for his thoughts on the way that story has moved today. Welcome, Richard. Can I ask you first, Richard? So, I mean, what's your assessment of the significance, the importance, the effects of that appalling blast at that hospital 24 hours on?
It's still an incredibly important and divisive event. In fact, in some ways, it's become more divisive because the Arab world, to generalize, is still absolutely convinced that Israel did it. You've seen America now, President Biden, stand behind Israel's own assessment or own claim that the damage at that hospital was caused by Palestinian Islamic Jihad misfiring a rocket or firing a rocket that failed. We've seen huge protests in Arab capitals. We've seen protests in the West Bank, which is very destabilizing potentially. The trouble is for Israel and for the broader region and the broader outlook for this conflict. If anything that sort of divides not only the events on the ground in Israel and Gaza, but the whole narrative, if you like, ever more widely, sets up the grounds for an ever deepening conflict.
Yes.
It's interesting that even Israel's allies in the Arab world seem to have turned against it over this.
So as the conflict then is about to develop, and even though Israel denies any responsibility for the blast at the hospital yesterday evening, do you guess that it will have some bearing on the way that conflict is conducted from Israel's point of view?
I think it will slow down the process of a ground offensive. I think there have been very serious conversations between Mr. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, and President Biden on his visit to Israel today about how to game this out. There's no doubt that the rhetoric that this hospital, attack, blast, whatever you call it, has triggered in the Arab world has put more pressure on groups like Hezbollah which have already a high degree of rhetoric around this conflict in Gaza to put its money where its mouth is. So I think you've seen the anger on the streets of Arab capitals. If these organizations like Hezbollah, which have promised to defend Gaza in some way by opening a second front, if they then sort of meekly cave and don't, that will be a strong blow to their reputations. So given that Netanyahu doesn't want a second or third front to develop, I think he will be gaming that out with President Biden.
Yes.
In terms of what American diplomats can do to either calm ruffled feathers through diplomacy or join in threatening, for example, Hezbollah if it does decide to join in.
Well, that's so interesting. Now, we were reporting earlier on Israel saying that humanitarian aid would now be allowed to cross the border from Egypt into Gaza as long as supplies did not reach Hamas. What does that mean? What does that mean will actually happen?
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. I mean, it sounds fairly simple, doesn't it? Egypt has a border crossing with Israel. There's lots of aid waiting on the Egyptian side of the border to go. In Egypt, sorry, Egypt has a border with Gaza, I should say, as well as with Egypt, and aid is waiting to cross into Gaza from Egypt. Israel, which is the only power that would be bombing that aid from the air or putting that aid at risk, if you like, says we're not going to touch it. So why doesn't it just go in to those poor million people, clustered against the border fence? Well, Egypt has its own security concerns about opening that border. And that very vague threat by Israel about making sure it doesn't get to Hamas is also something not to be taken lightly. So yes, in theory, good news for the people of Gaza. In practice, it's not quite clear whether whether we've made much progress.
Right. Richard, thank you for those thoughts. Hopefully we can talk again very soon.